Здравствуйте, comrade. That's like Russian for, hey, how's it going? Word. What a player. That's what it is. So this is going to be totally about the Russian Revolution, rolling through the couple of days that we spent with the Russians, and then there'll be another video about the rise of totalitarians. So, on we go. Looking at the study guide here. Talk about the Russians in World War I. So even before we get to World War I, let's look at the problems that the Russians have. Number one, you have a frayed relationship between the Tsar, Nicholas II, and the people. That didn't get any better in 1905 during the Russian Revolution, when the Tsar's troops had opened fire on the people looking for some help. Now, whether or not he gave the order is beyond the point. The fact that the Russian people no longer trusted their Tsar severs a religious, political, social, economic love that they've had for a few hundred years. Let's mount on top of that the fact that the Russians are well behind in a sense of industrial development. When the Russians send men out to the war, they are going to be facing the Germans, who are not behind in any way, and it's going to be a bloodbath, right? World War I on the Western Front is about really small movements of men and trench warfare and a battle of attrition. On the Eastern Front, it's generally about massive movements and huge losses. The Russians have battles where they lose hundreds of thousands of men as prisoners in the matter of weeks, so it is not in any way going to be good for the Russians. Let's also add to that a hungry population. The Russians have never been able to really feed themselves. You know what they should do is they should go in and take over the Ukraine, which is a huge grain area. Oh. How topical. On top of that, we should also include the fact that Russia is, as best as it can, trying to reform, right? Alexander II did it, Nicholas II tried it. They're trying to get a little more liberal, but this isn't Britain or France, and it's not liberal ideals. It's not going anywhere good. So you throw in on top of that World War I, which brings with it the need for total warfare, the need for more food stretched over a long supply chain headed to the front. Things are not going to go well. Question number 2 asks us about Rasputin. Into every story, we have to throw a little bit of a wacko. And Rasputin is that wacko who comes from a very odd background, but he has a very important skill. It's the ability to cure young Alexei. He has the ability to make the little hemophiliac problems of the kid go away from time to time, and that makes him invaluable to the Tsar and the Tsarina. He has told them that, and he's also told them that if he dies, the Romanovs are done. If he dies, then Russia is finished. So his hold on them is really the most sensitive thing in the world. It's the crown prince. There are no other sons in this generation of the Romanov family. Sure, we could have a girl, but they really want young Alexei to succeed to the throne. It's just not going to happen if he ever gets a really deep cut, so they need Rasputin around. Now, when Nicholas leaves to go to the front, when he leaves Petrograd and he goes to the front in 1916, it is the beginning of the end for the Russians. Nicholas thinks that when he shows up at the front, he'll be able to motivate his men to fight harder. Unfortunately, what he does is leave behind a political explosion. His wife, the Tsarina Alexandra, is a German woman who the people distrust almost implicitly. She seems to be controlling the country along with Rasputin, who there's a lot of deep suspicions against him, particularly among the aristocratic class of Russia, who wonder why this whack job is helping run the country. Their assassination of him makes the Tsar and the Tsarina even more fearful of what is to come in the future. The actual overthrow is going to happen in March. Now remember, there are two phases to this Russian Revolution. There's really the moderate phase and the radical phase. Much like when we talked about the French Revolution in 1789, there was the moderate phase, which really ushers in more of a middle-class mentality, and then there's the radical phase that is an attempt to bring the reforms of the revolution to a larger population. That's what's going to happen in Russia as well. So let's talk about that first overthrow. The first overthrow in 1917 in March takes place when the Tsar loses control of his army. When the army refuses to go out and help disperse people, that is the end of it. Since he dismissed the Duma after the 1905 Russian Revolution, Nicholas has relied upon the army as the real glue of the society. It's what allows him to rule. When they are no longer willing to shoot, and rightly so, shoot at innocent civilians, it's the end of it for Nicholas, and he abdicates the throne and hands over power to what we call a provisional government. Now that first word's incredibly important. It's a provisional government. Provisional means temporary. This is supposed to be the government that transitions Russia, in their eyes, in the provisional government's eyes, to a more liberal Western-style government. Keep in mind, this all happens while World War I is raging. Nothing is harder than fighting a war internally while also fighting one externally. Now, if you're the Germans, you couldn't be any happier. The Russians falling out of the war would alleviate one of the fronts for you. It would mean that you would be able to focus on the French and the British over on the Western Front, and so you do your best to try and help. In fact, you bring them Vladimir Lenin. Okay, flipping over the pages on my study guide here, just make sure I keep up. Okay. Let's pop down to Lenin. I know that's a little bit out of order here, but Lenin has been exiled from Russia earlier in his life. He's living in Switzerland, and the Germans go and get him out of Switzerland and transport him all the way across the war and land him right in the heart of Petrograd. Never has anything been more total war. That's perfect. Find the ultimate agitator, the real pain in the neck, and give him right to your enemy and be like, ha, hope you enjoy him. And so after the overthrow by the provisional government in March of 1917, Lenin arrives in April and almost immediately begins to agitate against the provisional government. Let's talk about that PG, or provisional government, for just a little bit. The provisional government is led by a man named Alexander Kerensky. It tends to have some socialist ideas, but it is also a very moderate socialism. It really believes that socialism should come around through democratic reforms. That being said, it has made two key mistakes. The provisional government, number one, has stayed in the war. Now, every problem of Russia isn't the problem of the Romanovs. It's the problem of the provisional government. They have scheduled elections, this is problem number two, that should take place in 9 months. That's a long way away. Everything is going to begin to sort of snowball on them. And as the problems of Russia develop, the people of Russia are going to look to the provisional government and say, these are your problems. Everything that was a problem under the Romanovs is now yours, and you haven't solved it. If you're Lenin, this is perfect. Perfect. Because you can sit on the sideline and barrack at them and say that everything is their fault, and it has nothing to do with you. That's perfect for Lenin. Now, Lenin is over on, if I'm looking at my study guide, he's over on the other part of this here, what's called the Petrograd Soviet. A Soviet is a workers, soldier, farmer commune. It just means a group. So a Soviet is like a council, a group of people. Let's not get afraid of that term. The other half of it, Petrograd, refers to the fact that it's the Soviet of Petrograd, the city that used to be St. Petersburg, and then we changed the name because St. Petersburg, that sounds too German. And we're at war with the Germans, so Petrograd, it sounds more Russian. Where are you going? Petrograd. Okay, for some reason that sounds very Russian when you do that, but who's in the Petrograd Soviet? As I said, it's a whole bunch of workers and farmers and soldiers, but it is also a nest of Bolsheviks. Bolsheviks. Okay, radical socialists, guys like Lenin, who believe that the revolution is going to happen, and it can happen in a country like Russia, that it can really be led by these small Soviet councils. Now, big picture for a moment, help me out. Go back to Marx. Marx had said that socialist revolutions happen in vastly improved industrial societies. It happens when industrialism and the intense, red-hot competition of it causes a problem between the middle classes and the working classes. And eventually, when the working classes are so much larger than the middle classes, then you can have the overthrow. But you have to have industrialism. What Lenin is saying here is, no, you're wrong. We are a backward country, right? Russia is in no way an industrialized nation. It's more an agrarian nation. But Lenin is saying that those Soviets, those small councils of people, can still lead a revolution, do exactly what Marx said, bring about the socialist moment, and by doing so, bring socialism to a country where it shouldn't happen. So in a sense, Lenin is creating his own version here of the Marx story. Marx would tell you the countries where socialism should take place, Britain, France, Belgium, Germany, maybe the United States, but not Russia. And Lenin's saying, no, it can happen. Going down the road here, we really look at the fact that no one knows quite who's in charge. Take, for instance, what's called Army Order Number 1. In the spring of 1917, the Petrograd Soviet issues an order allowing the army personnel to begin controlling themselves. That's right, I said the Petrograd Soviet, not the provisional government. If the provisional government had said it, you'd be like, okay, I understand, they're in charge. But the Petrograd Soviet tells the soldiers, you don't have to fight anymore if you don't want to. You don't have to listen to the orders of your officers, because those are not officers who you elected. They were appointed by a regime that is no more. So if you'd like to get rid of them, go ahead. Remember we looked at those Russian casualty numbers? 2.5 million missing Soviet, or I beg pardon, Russian men. A lot of them, at this moment right here, knowing that the country is coming apart at the seams, decided, I'm not fighting anymore. I'm going home. There's going to be a land grab, and I want my share. So a lot of those 2.5 million men, they ran home. Heading on down the road here. By November of 1917, it's clear that the provisional government doesn't have a chance, and the Petrograd Soviet is the real power. They overthrow, this is the second overthrow now, they overthrow the provisional government in November of 1917 without much of an effort. But they then find themselves in a larger civil war. The Bolsheviks are going to have to fight off the other side of Russia. Okay, so there's two sides here, what's called the Reds, those are the Bolsheviks, and the Whites. The Whites represent a whole diverse set of individuals. Some of them are other socialists, Mensheviks, who aren't as radical as the Bolsheviks. Some of them are monarchists who want to see the Romanovs back on the throne. Some of them are nationalists from different parts of Russia that want their own independence. Some of them are allies. We're going to see the United States and other Western countries intervene on the side of the Whites to try and help out. That civil war, though, is going to be won by the Reds. And they're going to win it for a number of reasons. They control the urban centers of the society. There's one. They have the Red Army led by Trotsky, which is way more organized than it was in World War I. They have the Cheka, the secret police, willing to do the nasty work that you need in these kind of moments. They also have a single unified objective. Unlike the Whites, which represent a whole bunch of different ideals and what we want to achieve, the Bolsheviks at least have one plan. Last thing I want to talk about here is the Bolshevik policy. The Bolshevik pledge had been peace, land, and bread. That's what Lenin had promised. Notice how quickly the Bolsheviks go to work after their overthrow in 1917. Peace, land, bread. Peace. By the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, the Russians remove themselves from World War I. They lose a whole bunch of Western territory, but if you're Lenin, you don't care. You know why? Because eventually, we're going to get that too. Because the socialist revolution doesn't end in this country. It ends when the borders of the world are gone and we have it all. That's the Leninist ideal. So peace, done. Land. All of the land was expropriated, or basically taken over by the government for the purpose of being used as resource for the people. Peace, land, bread. We're going to start feeding the people as best as we can. Okay? On top of that, we take the factories and we put them into the control of the Soviets. We allow women full equality. Now, this equality should not be mistaken for equality of a wonderful life. You can suffer just as well as a man. That's some real equality. Okay? The Soviets, in that sense, begin to control the society. The Bolsheviks know that in a Marxist socialist sense, they are at a crucial stage, what Marx would have called the dictatorship of the proletariat. This is a transitional moment. Now, having one power, they must educate the society, a very, very uneducated society, especially in a socialist sense, and convince them of the merits of socialism. They have to do this and then move on to what Marx would have called the classless society that comes after it. Lenin understands this is going to be a very, very difficult step. It's one of the reasons we see the new economic policy, the NEP, that allows a little bit of capitalism. But if you're Lenin, this is a crucial, crucial step. And it's a step, in all defense of Marx, that the USSR, the Bolsheviks, never got beyond. They never left this moment of the dictatorship of the proletariat. No socialist experiment on this earth has ever left this moment. As far as a timeline goes, or a to-do list, they've never gotten to that next point of the classless society. The leadership never fades away. The society never becomes a utopian experiment because, frankly, you can't change human nature that radically, and it would take too long of a period of time to try and get enough resources to make it successful. So, this is kind of doomed from the beginning, but using a lot of brutal force, the Bolsheviks are going to make a run for it. That's the Russian Revolution. Hope you enjoyed it.